Welcome back to another explainer. So, today we're doing something, well, kind of magical. We're taking this fascinating journey from the shadowy, mysterious realms of ancient folklore straight into the bright, highly structured world of modern educational logic. We're going to explore this brilliant European initiative that essentially takes the oldest legends ever told and completely transforms them into incredibly effective modern tools for the classroom.
All right, let's take a quick look at the roadmap for today. We're going to start with the power of folk myths, look at the actual Mythos to Logos project, walk through its 7 phases of folklore, and then do a deep dive case study on the Pleiades. After that, we'll unpack the lessons beyond the legends, and finally, look at the modern values we can pull from these ancient tales. Let's get into it.
Okay, part 1, the power of folk myths.
Think about it. We live in an era of smartphones, algorithms, artificial intelligence. So why on earth do ancient stories about ghouls, fairies, and stars still matter when we're teaching kids today? Well, it actually comes down to how universal they are. The values locked inside these myths, they're timeless. They act as this incredible unifying force. They help students figure out these shared human experiences that stretch across all of Europe and, honestly, all of humanity. They're basically perfect mirrors for human nature.
Moving on to part 2, let's look at the actual Mythos to Logos project.
So this brings us to the groundbreaking initiative that actually put this whole theory to the test. And looking at this visual framework, it's essentially a tree of life. You can really see the vision. Check out how the roots intertwine way down in the earth, all marked with the flags of the participating nations. It's such a brilliant way to symbolize how all these diverse, parallel stories share the exact same cultural roots and how they all ultimately nourish this one unified tree of knowledge.
And to actually pull this off, 6 partner countries teamed up. You've got Greece leading the charge as the coordinator, working right alongside schools in Italy, Poland, Portugal, Romania, and Lithuania. And by sharing their own local folklore, we're talking everything from Polish dragons to Romanian fairies, they brought together these incredibly diverse groups of students. It just goes to show that our shared heritage can absolutely bridge any geographic or language gap. It's really cool.
All right, on to part 3, the 7 phases of folklore. So how exactly do you take thousands of years of scattered European mythology and turn it into a curriculum that actually works in a modern classroom? Well, the educators organized it chronologically by theme. Back in 2018, they started by looking up, exploring myths of the sky, the earth, and the stars. Then in 2019, things got a bit more supernatural, covering fairies, spirits, and haunted places. By 2020, they pivoted to mortal power and mythical beasts, kings, giants, dragons, that sort of thing. And finally, in 2021, they brought the students back down to earth, focusing on plants, animals, and actually, this next part is super interesting, illnesses.
Yeah, notice that last entry there, Phase 7, illnesses. Now, that was definitely not on the original syllabus back in 2018. But you know, the global COVID-19 pandemic happened, international travel totally shut down, and the project had to be extended by a year. But the educators did something brilliant. They adapted. They used this massive global crisis to inspire a final phase that was incredibly relevant right then and there. Students actually studied historical myths about plagues and diseases. It let them connect their own modern lockdown experiences with how our ancestors processed mass illness through storytelling. Just a brilliant pivot.
Let's jump into part 4 and look at a specific case study, the Pleiades.
To really see how this translates into an actual lesson, let's look at the Pleiades. So in Greek mythology, the Pleiades were 7 sisters, the daughters of the Titan Atlas. Now, if you look up at that star cluster on a clear night, you can usually only see 6 stars clearly, right? Well, the myth explains this by saying the 7th sister, Merope, is hiding her face in shame. And why? Because out of all her divine sisters, she was the only one who chose to fall in love with a mortal man. It's a beautiful, kind of heartbreaking myth, but it perfectly sets the stage for a classroom lesson.
So how do teachers take that ancient story and make it a modern learning experience? They use this active learning method called the experiential laboratory. It goes like this. First, you define what a fairy tale actually is with the kids. You establish that it's a fabrication, an imagined narrative. Second, you split the class up to read different cultural variations of that same myth. Third, one student from each group gets up and narrates their version to the whole room. And finally, step 4, and this is the most important part, they have a massive discussion about the underlying themes.
Which brings us to part 5, lessons beyond the legends.
I want to really zoom in on that discussion phase for a second, because that's where the heavy psychological lifting actually happens. The curriculum gives teachers these highly specific questions to get the kids debating. In fact, let me ask you the exact same prompt they use. In fairy tales, how is evil represented? Because when you read about a monster or a curse, you're not just reading about magic, right? You're engaging with that core, fundamental conflict between good and evil. The students have to find that conflict in the story. It takes these huge, abstract moral concepts and makes them visible and highly debatable.
And honestly, the questions get even deeper. Like, the guide will literally ask the class, how do we fight the fear of freedom and walk paths to autonomy? I mean, wow. Fear of freedom is basically our fear of becoming masters of ourselves. It's the fear of growing up. So by talking about a myth where a character steps out on their own, these kids are learning how to process their own anxieties about independence, but they're doing it in this completely safe, guided narrative space.
And look at this one. This is a fascinating focus on impulse control. I want it now, I can't wait. We all know that feeling, right? Well, the curriculum asks, is lack of self-restraint decisive for the plot? Think about it. Think about how many times impatience totally ruins a hero's quest. By analyzing why a fictional character couldn't just wait 5 minutes, students are actually analyzing the real-world consequences of their own impulsiveness. It's genius.
Just take a second and really look at this quote. This is straight from the curriculum's discussion guide. Independence cannot be conquered without pain. That is a massive realization. Fairy tales are so brilliant exactly because they can touch on these deep, heavy truths when kids are just too young to hear them stated plainly. You can't just look an 8-year-old in the eye and say, hey, adult life is going to involve suffering. But you can show them a hero who endures a ton of hardship to win their freedom, and that plants this incredible, vital seed of resilience.
All right, final section, Part 6, Modern Values from Ancient Tales.
So what's the actual real-world payoff of blending ancient mythos with modern logos? Well, the results are incredibly tangible. By picking apart these dark themes, the curses, the plagues, the villains, these students are actually building bright, modern skills. The project documented a real increase in social inclusion and equality as kids learn to accept diversity. We're seeing better tolerance, more solidarity. There are even measurable improvements in their language skills and their digital literacy, since kids across these 6 countries had to collaborate online and present in English. But most importantly, it is a massive boost to their critical and creative thinking. Which brings me to one final thought to wrap up this explainer. Are the monsters in our myths actually the key to unlocking our own psychological resilience? It really seems like it, doesn't it? By facing down the dragons, the ghosts, and the plagues of our shared folklore, we're doing so much more than just preserving the past. We're actively building stronger, more empathetic minds for the future. I really hope this look into the Mythos to Logos project leaves you wanting to dust off an old book of legends and see what hidden truths you can find for yourself. Keep exploring, stay curious, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.